the third big terrorist attack within 19 months. Many people, both inside France and outside your country, have been asking the question, why? Again, what do you make of it?
France has always been all the way up on the list of targets when it comes to the radical Islamic terrorism list and logic. Now, there are two basic set of reasons for that. One of them is indeed anchored in our high politics, in international politics. France is active on the battlefield in Syria and Iraq fighting ISIL. France is active on several African fronts, fighting in Mali, in Central Africa, and elsewhere against the same kind of overall radical Islam movement. But I would say that what happened tragically last night in Nice, over that Promenade des Anglais horrible massacre, is to be explained more by the fact of what is happening in France itself. Namely, proportionally, France is the number one, or rather number two, per capita in terms of the dimensions of the Muslim immigrant or immigrant-issue population. So the potential internally in France for mobilization and for radicalization, which might turn into violent forms, is statistically, numerically higher. That explains why the target on one hand sets what is on the ISIL mind and ISIL and associates, if I may say so. And that explains also why is it that over French territory we have so many and so frequently those horrible, tragic events.
Mr. Cui, here in Beijing, at this moment we do not know any terrorist organizations has ever claimed the responsibility so far. We do not know whether it's really linked to ISIL, as Professor Joav Toker just indicated. But what do you make of it? Again, 19 months, the third biggest, killing now more than 200 altogether.
Yeah. So firstly, very sorry for this, very sad incident in Nice in France. You know, as a research fellow in China, I do have some French friends. Yeah, very, bad feeling about this incident. But of course, now I think it's time for French government to review what happened, what's the policy or something else. I would like to add some real points on why always is France to be the target of the terrorism attack is. Because maybe, in the past, always once there is a terrorism attack, the ISIL or some other terrorism organization would be, responsible for this attack. But this time, a little bit different, I think. So I think now the very important change for this terrorism attack in France is we need to understand that maybe more and more endogenic reasons, for example. Because maybe in the past, most of the terrorism attack is imported from other countries, from other part of the region. But this time, so far, no any evidence to say it's from other organization or other country. But if we know now, France is in a very difficult political and economic situation, we can understand maybe perhaps some people who felt frustrated, they want to do something to share something. So to show some, very bad feeling. So I would like to say that it's good time for French government to understand, not always from outside, maybe inside.
Well, we have seen many of those incidents over the past few years, homegrown terrorism, both inside the United States and also in European continents as well. Having said that, though, Professor Toker, at this moment, the French government proposed two things. One is to extend the emergency plan, which had been in the country since the last terrorist attack in November. And secondly is to continue the intensive military patrol inside some of the major cities in France. Of course, that takes a lot of efforts, both of these two measures. Can they really continue? Are they sustainable? What about the long-term plan? I know the government still hasn't figured it out. It's unfair to ask you just as an expert, but it is a fair question. I have to ask it.
It is a fair question, and it is also a very fair comment you made, both of you, in the studio in Beijing 3 minutes ago, stating that we assume right now that what happened in Nice last night indeed was linked to ISIL energy, although we do not have confirmation to that. The only confirmed element, seemingly, is the identity of the driver, of the person who was there, and who happens to be apparently a French Tunisian citizen, namely a French citizen born in Tunisia, 31 years old. We do not have confirmation as to his potential links to ISIL. We don't know whether he was a lone wolf and operated alone. It would be difficult to suspect that, because he had a truck, he had some other equipment, he had fake weapons, etc. Now, when it comes to the question of the extension of the emergency state, how right you are indeed in saying that this is on the limit, on the borderline of sustainability. But in terms of practical mobilization and in terms of reserves, when it comes to French gendarmerie and police and special forces and special military units, it is feasible. It is feasible on the logistical side. How feasible would it be in terms of the political aspects and the fallouts of all that? This indeed is a very good question and a very borderline one, because you can hear, although also over the last 24 hours in France itself, and not only within opposition leaders, criticism regarding the way the government is handling all that, in spite of the fact that not even a day has passed since the horrible massacre had taken place in southern France. So there would be over those lands some moving sands in the coming days.
Talking about politics, Professor Toker, next year, it is already the presidential election year in France. At this moment, if we talk too much politics, probably is inappropriate in face of such a crisis and crime. And yet, it is very relevant because it could become a very important part of the presidential election party politics. What do you make of it, these series of terrorist attacks for the major candidates of these campaigns? And will those major candidates in the campaigns be able to bring some fresh ideas to the table to better protect the French people?
There is no doubt in my mind that those issues related to overall security, relations to the extreme radical Islam threat and what the government is doing or should be doing or was not doing, etc., would be a central issue in the presidential campaign. You see, by the way, what happens on the other side of the Atlantic. In this sense, it's right, the same thing, although America had been spurred numerically, not into America had been victimized. Not as much, not as many victims as in
but Professor,
France.
my question is very specific. My
What?
question is very specific. How many candidates are already working very intensely on this terrorist issue? And how is it compared to the current president now in the office? How much will that eventually shape your presidential election? Some specific answers from you, sir.
As for the question, how many candidates are working with that, my answer would be all of them. We're speaking about 12 to 15, both on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side of the political spectrum, although not all of these 12 to 15 had officially declared their candidacy. So they're all working with it, that's for sure. The new thing, which I've gathered over the last 24 hours or so, is for the first time, very few hours after the hit, after the shock, after the trauma, you hear direct criticism regarding the performance of government and the military and police forces,
and of course,
punctually regarding what could have been perhaps avoided.
This is
new.
This is very new. People are not trying to be quote-unquote politically correct anymore, even the candidates. So what do you think, Mr. Cui, observing from afar with many of friends in France, what would this mean for the political future of this country, and how would that link to the overall turmoil going on in some parts of Europe?
Yes, exactly. I think this incident will give a very, very negative impact on the political situation in France. As we know, next year there will be a presidential election. And even now, there are more and more, support from average people in France to this far right political forces. So that's the problem is, just like our French friends mentioned, that all politicians, they have to show their concern about this very, very serious issue, but they do have different solutions. For example, for the far-right political forces, they will strengthen their slogan to say we should say no to European Union, we should say no to immigration, we should say no to outsiders. So that's a very, very big problem for French politicals and society.